Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a Novastar Prep webinar tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. And I know some of you are still coming into the from the waiting room, so we'll get started momentarily. But thank you for joining us tonight. We're talking about the digital SAT, what we know now after a year, getting those of you who are unfamiliar with the test up to speed with it, and sharing some insights into how the test works, how the scoring goes, and everything like that. So we can get right underway here and go on with our event. Tonight's event is being recorded, so certainly if you have to step out at some point, you will get the rest of the information. If you want to share it with any friends, colleagues, your students' friends, whatever might be helpful, you'll get that recording after we meet tonight. All right. And so just quickly to get started, for those of you that might be unfamiliar with Novastar Prep, I'll give you a quick overview before we dive into tonight's comprehensive agenda about the digital SAT. But just so all of you know, we offer services across the board, not just SAT and ACT prep. We also cover every academic high school subject, middle school, elementary school, and we tutor college students as well. We certainly are experts in test prep, certainly across the board. That includes IB testing, AP testing, certainly a lot of grad school related tests like the GRE. We have students working on the GMAT with us, LSAT, things of that nature. I myself started at the company on the college readiness side of things, and that's where we offer our college coaching, essay writing, everything with the applications, financial aid, scholarships, and things like that. And certainly one thing that we pride ourselves on is our dedicated support. Every student that works with us has a success advisor monitoring their progress, offering biweekly progress reports, and checking in with parents. Tonight, we are talking, though, specifically about test prep and specifically about the digital SAT. We're going to talk about demystifying it a little bit. When we first introduced the topic to our parents last year around this time, it was in relation to the United States launching the digital SAT on our shores. It was happening internationally as a pilot and at certain schools. Now we're close to a year in, so sharing some updated information, but still also going over the basics of the test so that you understand what to expect on test day, what to share with your students, and any students that we have here in the audience, just getting you familiar with what it's like. As we've moved away from the paper-based test, it's good to get a sense of this, and not everyone's had an experience with the test yet. Certainly, if you are the parent of younger students, 8th, 9th, 10th graders, they may not have been exposed to this yet. If you have some 11th graders, they might just be getting used to it. And so we're going to go over all of that tonight. So my name is Bernadette Smith. I am the Academic Sales Director here at Novastar Prep. Said programs there, titles changed slightly. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself before we dive in to everything this evening. So as I mentioned, I am on the internal team here at Novastar Prep, but I am a licensed high school guidance counselor in the state of Massachusetts. I do reside there right now, a little bit outside of Boston, but I am part of the Novastar Prep internal team, where you can see we're headquartered in Northern Virginia. So those of you that might be from some partner schools of us, I know Meridian High School, Oakton High School, Paul VI, a lot of other schools in the area that we work with. We certainly started in that area, grew in that area, but we do have team members across the country at this point. So we know those school systems extremely well. I myself am very familiar with them also, but as well as up here in Massachusetts and in the Northeast in general. I've been a school counselor for over 10 years in both high school settings that are public as well as those that are private. And it's been a joy of my life working with students on their post-secondary plans and helping them through their high school journeys. But I've also always been a writing tutor and a college, not always been a college instructor, but I've been a writing tutor since I was way back in undergrad, and have consistently done that throughout, tutoring students at the high school level, the college level, and PhD candidates on their writing, and working in college instructing around, intro to lit, English composition, things like that. But tonight we're going to get more into the digital SAT. And so let me get to our agenda here. We're going to go over the changes. We're going to also talk about what Blue Book is, and that's the app where the test is actually housed for students. We're going to talk about some of the concepts tested and some advantages and disadvantages to the ACT. There's a big asterisk next to that one now because the ACT is also changing. So expect to hear from us on that as well to help you navigate which test might be better for your student. And then certainly we'll also go over a game plan that should be helpful to a variety of ages in high school and as you look ahead to the test. Few little housekeeping things as we dive into tonight's presentation. As I mentioned, this webinar is being recorded, so you will be sent the Zoom link to it that expires in 12 days, but we will also be uploading it to YouTube with a permalink so that you will have access to it there. Also, the chat is disabled, but the Q&A is open, so you will be able to put some questions in there. One slight downside is that I can't always see them when I'm presenting, so if I don't get to it right away, please know that I will, or at the very least, we'll tackle them towards the end of tonight's discussion where we can have some time for Q&A. And other than that, it should be pretty straightforward. I'm here to answer questions. You'll have all my contact information if you have follow-up questions, and we'll dive in from there. One quick thing as well, we do have a special promotion for those of you in attendance tonight that, stay through the end. You're also going to get, something with us related to a free consultation, and then buy 10 hours of tutoring, get 2 free. I'll detail that in the email to all of you after the fact, but it will be something helpful for you moving forward. So for those of you that may be brand new to the SAT or maybe just found out that it changed recently, it changed a little bit, now that it's 2025, this seems a while ago, but in the spring of 2023, the test changed internationally. And so we were still seeing paper-based tests here in the United States at that time, and we were still seeing a paper-based PSAT at that time. But certainly, where we're looking at now, we're talking about last year, in March of 2024, the digital SAT went live in the United States to every testing center. There were some pilot schools before that we were able to glean some information from, and certainly from the international pool of students taking the test. But it was a gradual rollout, as you can see here with where it was internationally. They were doing it throughout the year. PSAT assessments, still paper in spring of 2023, but then it became fall of 2023 digital tests in that cohort. And then certainly in the fall of this past year, 2024, the PSAT was digital, as you can see here. So that's when it changed. That's in the past now. It is digital moving forward. That is the case. There is no more paper-based SAT unless you are a student with a documented disability where a paper test is still available. That has to go through the College Board. That is an entire process of getting approved for that accommodation. We see it occasionally, but you can still get all traditional accommodations on the digital SAT outside of the paper-based element. So extended time, extra breaks, anything with enlarged writing on the screen, different things, of that nature. But this is where we are today. So there are a couple reasons behind the change, and I won't bore you to tears with this, but part of it was they wanted it to be easier for students to take. They wanted it to be more in line with what students of this generation are used to in terms of their use of technology. And as you can see here, the Vice President of College Readiness at the College Board who develops the test, they wanted it simply to be easier for schools to give and more relevant to students. It's not just that it's online. They want to make sure what it is online is really makes a lot of different benefits in a lot of ways. Not simply that it's a test online, but that affects score release, that affects security, that affects the way that they score it now. There's a lot of different elements to it. But we had been anticipating it in the field for quite some time. Back when I was in my last high school that I worked at, we were waiting for that as well. So they did finally launch it. And I can say after a year, I've seen a really positive experience with our students taking the test, my own children as well, and that it seemed to be a seamless transition for the most part. Another reason for the change, faster score release. You used to have to wait several weeks to receive your SAT scores because they did have scorers that were manually going through these and scoring the test. Of course, there's a Scantron piece, but there's other elements to it for checking for errors, student-produced responses, and different variety of reasons. Obviously, they were literally being mailed to the College Board, so there was a delay there. Now you're seeing scores in 2 weeks. I imagine in the future that will be even faster. But right now we're seeing, the December test was on December 7th. Individuals got their scores by the 20th. They're also, touting enhanced security, which doesn't necessarily affect, us as counselors or us as, parents and students, but on their end, it has been better for them. And then flexibility of administration. So for someone like myself who has proctored the SAT before or been a test site coordinator like myself, it made it a lot easier. Students will still test in a testing center, though. That is not going to change. Call me in a year and see if they change it, but I highly doubt it because they do need it to take place in a school setting where they can make sure there's proctors there to be helpful to students, provide opportunities for students to let them know if there's an issue, obviously to avoid any cheating. Students can also focus better at school than they can taking the test in their bedroom. A lot of variety of reasons. And they also went through it with AP testing during the pandemic at home and some of the issues that arose with that. Lastly, one of the main reasons they wanted to change the SAT at all was to make it a shorter test so that students would feel less exhausted by the end, less overwhelmed by the duration of the test. But in order to make it shorter, it required adaptive scoring so that we could still get meaningful data from the students. So when we dropped it down to 2 hours and 15 minutes, while the duration is a lot better for students, they needed to add the element of adaptive scoring so that we could actually pull out more information about a student and what their score should be versus trying to do a super short test and, pretending that it means enough to carry weight in the admissions process, or whether it's related to placement in classes at the college level, measuring progress. They couldn't drop it down to an hour-long test or anything like that. So it does sit at 2 hours and 15 minutes now. And with that, they are using adaptive scoring, which we'll go into great detail about. Comparing the changes, I'll look at this very briefly with you all because some of them are very obvious. But in the past, those of you that are in my age bracket, we took the SAT on paper. And so that was a paper pencil test. Now it is computer, laptop, or tablet. You cannot take the digital SAT on a cell phone, and nor should you. It really would be a tough experience and tough for schools to manage. Students can use their own device and bring it to school, or they can coordinate with the school or the testing center if they do not own a device for this. Works fine on tablets. The best, obviously, I've heard is just using a laptop. Some schools will set up computer labs, but those are becoming fewer and far between, as you can imagine. For availability, we know now it's available for all of our students, and there is no paper-based option. Previously, it was 3 hours long with 3 different sections. Now it is 2 hours and 14 minutes long with 2 different sections. They combined reading and writing into one. Math remains its own separate section, but you'll see it's really split into 4 sections. Reading and writing module 1, reading and writing module 2, math module 1, math module 2. In the past, you couldn't use a calculator on one of the math sections. Now you can use it on both. So part of that was the College Board realizing that, the threat our parents used to say to us about you'll never have a calculator in your pocket. Well, they do now. And now it's more about problem solving, applying skills. How can you, use your problem solving skills and critical thinking to get to an answer more quickly, but you know that it's accurate. They can use their own calculator, certainly, and there's still the list of those that are allowed by the College Board, but a calculator is built into the test. It is the Desmos calculator. And scoring, while it is adaptive scoring now, the total score has not changed. It is still out of 1,600. God, what was it, like 10 years ago? They jumped to being 2,400. That did not last very long. It didn't make a whole lot of sense for people, so it is still 1,600. What you imagine to be an average score is still the same. That we're seeing very similar results from the beginning of this between paper-based tests and the digital test itself. So again, scoring hasn't changed in that regard. We will get into adaptive scoring though. So here, as we talk about the most notable change, and I always say this to students, they're used to taking tests online, whether they've been taking quizzes on Google Classroom for the last couple years or simply got thrown into it during the pandemic when they were learning from home, or the sheer fact that they have had screens since they were born. You know, they have been more exposed to taking things online versus my generation or others. So it really wasn't about it going online. Sure, that makes it easy, but that's not the biggest change. It really is that the test is adaptive. And it is not adaptive by question. So it's not you answer one question and then the next one change, but it is adaptive by section. And so each section of the SAT is split into 2 modules, as I mentioned before. Each of them contain easy, medium, and difficult questions. Based on a student's performance in the first module, that dictates how difficult the second module is. And so the second module of reading and writing can either be hard or easy, no in between. There's no medium. You get pushed into one or the other. Same thing for math. So basically what the College Board is doing with their algorithm and the way our test works, our mock test, is that it is pushing you to where they think you belong based on the responses to your questions from Module 1, reading and writing. Same thing with math. What they mean is they're trying to put you in a position to achieve your target score. And that is based on what you answer in that first module for reading and writing, and then that first module for math. Like I said, it can only be one or the other. It's going to be easy or it's going to be hard. And it's based on what we call item response theory. So this is where the weighting of the questions is different. So you hear about this with GPAs, right? An unweighted GPA versus a weighted and what that means. Same thing is happening here. So what you're seeing is that when you go into a different section, you're going to see, you know, in either section, frankly, they're all weighted differently between easy, medium, and hard. And there's also some weighting difference between student-produced responses. And so they adjust the weighting of the questions based on how well they indicate a test taker's ability. So weighting plays a crucial role in every student's SAT strategy. So students want to focus on not just answering more questions correctly, but the ones that carry the most weight. So part of this is going to sound slightly counterintuitive in the sense that you want to make sure that you're answering more easy questions. You know, understandably, some of the hard ones are going to be more difficult, but you want to note that high-scoring students typically answer easy questions correctly. So missing an easy question can significantly reduce one's chances of achieving a high score. So it's as though the easy questions are weighted more heavily in that sense because they're assuming you know how to do it. The harder questions they're giving slightly more leeway with. So scoring takes into account that level of difficulty, and you want to focus on answering, again, but the ones that carry the most weight. So those are going to be those easy questions. Of course, you want to answer the medium and hard, and then also the student-produced response questions. There's some weight on those. That's where there's no multiple choice responses, just a blank spot for the student to type in the answer. So this is truly the really big difference on the test. And so where we see this land usually, and I say usually because, again, this is about weighting versus number of questions. But you would see, for example, in reading and writing module 1, you need to achieve about 70% correct or more to test into module 2 hard. Same thing for math. It can be that you get 68% correct because you got 100% of a certain kind of question right and only missed a few, but one was weighted more heavily. You know, it's not an exact 70%, but it's between 68 and 71% correct to test into module 2 hard. And this, I wanted to give an example because I know that this is a lot in terms of the adaptive scoring element of this, but you know, this is from an official SAT practice test. When a student misses only question number 25, and again, this is one specific test, it doesn't matter which number question it is, in module 2 of reading and writing, this results in a score of 780. But if they only miss number 23 in the same section, that drops the score to 750. Why does missing 23 have more than twice the impact on somebody's score as missing 25? 23 is significantly easier, so it's more impactful in adaptive scoring. So again, I know that sounds incredibly counterintuitive, but basically what they're saying is these are kind of gimme points. You should be able to go get those. So you want to avoid careless mistakes. You want to make sure that you're demonstrating that you have that foundational knowledge. in across the board. So whether it's an easy algebra question or it's an easy punctuation question on reading and writing, whatever it might be, this is where you can really see the difference between the scores here. So missing just one question on number 25 in module 2, and maybe that was a medium or hard question, versus the easy question missed in module 2, and that can affect the score. So while this is incredibly important information for students to know, we don't want them to hyper focus on trying to figure out if a question is easy or hard. And so again, we're going to give some tips about this as we go through it, but I did want to explain a little bit about how the scoring works, because that is the biggest change. And there are strategies related to that, but we don't want students to get caught up in trying to spend too much mental energy deciding if one question's easy, medium, or hard. It gets a little bit murky there, but we can give some really specific tips that will be helpful. And, we said that it's personalized in that second module on the student's performance on the first stage. Supposedly, and this is what I've seen, but I'm saying supposedly because this was the College Board's intent, results in a more efficient assessment and more tailored experience for each student. And in all, so I do consultations with families every single week about the results of their mock test or their official test or practice test or whichever it may be, and going through, and it does typically makes sense, but we do adjust the goal after that to say, okay, if you're always testing into module 2 easy, we need to work on testing you into module 2 hard. And then the approach becomes, what do you do once you're there? And it's much more difficult. So if you look at this, again, I mentioned this, but just so you can see it written out, reading and writing module 1 identifies a student's likely score range for reading and writing. In module 2, it's adapted in response to module 1, and students will either test into module 2 easy or module 2 hard. Typically speaking, that means you're capped at a certain score by testing into easy. Can't get over 600. Same thing, but you can get the full complement of 800 if you get everything right, if you test into module 2 hard. Same thing for math. So as much as there are medium questions, there's no medium section to test into. And so I'm going to see if there's any questions yet about that, and we can hold them till the end too, if that's easier, but none in the Q&A right now, and I can certainly expand on that. But I did want to show a little bit now that we've been going into the test. So in 2023, the average SAT score was 1028 for the seniors of that year. For 2024, this has been all digital because the first test of 2024 was March, and that was a digital test. It's 1024. That's not strikingly different to me because I do feel like there was an adjustment period at the beginning. And all of these are down from 2022, which we saw the score of about a 1050. I think that the pandemic did affect some foundational learning that students missed in some of the testing there. I also think some of the confusion around test optional policies could be a factor. But I do imagine students in particular situations where some of the foundational concepts tested to cause that kind of drop nationally, is of interest there. And there are some studies done on it, but I would say likely that is a huge factor there. But 1024, did not surprise me on this. And I think, we're going to continue to see what the results yield from, the upcoming tests this spring and continue to get more data sets for it. But that is the national average since the digital SAT was released. All right. Now we're going to dive into Blue Book itself, which again is the testing app for the SAT. And, if you have any questions about what we talked about related to scoring, please feel free to let me know, or you can send me an email after tonight. We can certainly set up a time to chat about what that means. And when you take a mock test with us, you'll be able to see it very clearly, so we can kind of break down how that works as well. All right. So what to expect with Blue Book. So all of your students, if they're going to take the SAT, or if they might even already have this on their school issued Chromebook, they will automatically install the Blue Book app at certain schools. Basically, it's just an app that you download like anything else to your MacBook, your Chromebook, your whatever it might be. And it's where students can they'll register for the test still on the College Board website, but this is where they'll actually take the test. So in here, you're going to find a testing timer. So when they actually take the test, how much time they have in each section. Calculator. Every student gets a formula reference sheet with some of the basic formulas they need that they may not have memorized from years ago. There's also an annotation function. This allows students to be able to highlight certain parts of a particular word problem in an excerpt on the reading and writing section, and they can type some notes about it. There's also a bookmark for review so that students, kind of the same as if we would have, dog-eared a page to go back to it, they can just go ahead and hit the little bookmark button, and then they can see at the top bar of their test how many questions they bookmark so that they can easily jump back to the ones that they need to work on before time expires. There's also an option eliminator. So we all used to just cross out 2 of the answers to get ourselves to a 50-50 shot. This is a built-in feature. Question menu, which is what I mentioned at the top, kind of being able to click around to different questions. And of course, like any computer and any app, there's a zoom in capability. Can't stress this enough that the students should be registering for this and for their College Board account with their own personal email address. I've seen it enough times working with families where it's the mom's email address and then they can't get into it, and then they're trying to reset the password and there becomes an issue because they can't get a hold of someone, or you're calling the College Board to reset it and they're confused between the name who signed up for the test and the student actually taking it. So it's the College Board account should absolutely be in your student's name with your student's email address. If they have a school issued email address, I would suggest they have a personal one. There are certain school issued email addresses that automatically bounce back certain outside emails coming in. And so you don't want to miss anything that's critical for that. So make sure if they don't have a personal Gmail account already, or they've been using a school one forever because they're issued so early now, make sure that they establish one that they can use for this, that they can either forward those messages from, or make sure that they're frequently checking it to get those login information, password resets, and then obviously follow-up information when their scores are ready, other pertinent information from the College Board. Okay. So before the test, we do want students to log in well before they ever take the official SAT. They'll also gain familiarity by taking a mock test with us on our platform, which is incredibly similar, but we want kids to be familiar with Blue Book because that's where they're actually going to take the test as well. And you don't want to log in for the first time on test day and realize you don't know your password or that you don't know where to click next. Ease of use will certainly prepare students for better time management. They do have free practice tests on here and test preview, so you can take a look at certain things there. And then we do suggest once you're in here, start working with a Novastar Prep test prep expert, because while there's some information in here, it doesn't drill down as deep into some of the specific question types that a student is getting right or wrong. It will tell you a general content domain, but will not tell you the specific types of questions they're getting wrong. So it's worthwhile to look at this. But any student who works with us, we certainly welcome them to share these scores with us, but then also take one of our mock tests, because the more data, the better the personalized prep plan can be, so we can start identifying patterns and see what's happening. We've actually had some reports too where students are finding a lower score here than they expected, or a higher one here and a lower one elsewhere. And so it's very worthwhile to get the data to be adequate there, because some students have walked into an official test feeling very well assured by this and then missing a couple questions that they didn't realize they needed support on. So what to expect on test day? The big thing here you see highlighted is your device will need to stay on for roughly 3 hours. If anyone in the audience tonight has ever worked in a school, you know that students will show up without their power cord frequently for any of their personal devices, or the ones issued by the school. And then they're frantically searching for a power cord, or they came to school and they thought it was charged and it has 25% battery left. You need to make sure it is fully charged. Not every student will be situated next to an outlet or running an extension cord. So again, just like we say to them for school every day, the same would be the case for this, and even stressed more so because the seating will be arranged beforehand. And you do need to take a 2-hour and 15-minute test plus instructions and a little bit of a break. So make sure it's charged up for 3 hours. Students will need to download Blue Book, as I mentioned before test day. bring a photo ID and their admissions ticket, which they can also have on their phone screen. They would bring a pencil or a pen with them, and they'll receive separate scratch paper from the proctor in their particular room, or if they're taking it in the cafeteria, wherever it might be. That you can't use your own scratch paper, but you will be given it by the proctor. As always, we suggest that students arrive 15 minutes early so they can breathe, get settled. And then simply what will happen from there is students will log in and enter a code given to them by the proctor on test day. When you do a mock test with us, it's very similar, just rather than a code, it's an unlocking of a test. It operates very similarly. So from here, we're going to go on to important concepts tested. Everything there you see about test day, if you ever have any questions about it, I can certainly be of assistance. But also if you check out the College Board website, they'll also tell you all the things you need to know about what to bring on test day, what you can't bring on test day. Can you bring this kind of calculator? Should you bring a snack? You can find all of that there readily updated. All right, so as I mentioned, the content of the test didn't change drastically, but there are important things to keep in mind about how it's formatted now and how much they're asking of particular types of questions. So we'll start here with reading and writing and the structure of that section. So this would be for Module 1 and 2. As you can see, I have the timing written out here for 32 minutes per module, but accommodations are available for students with disabilities. So if you have time and a half or 100% extra time, obviously that timing will work out differently. There is one break like in this test versus whereas a student who has extra breaks would get more. But what you're going to find in the reading and writing section are 54 multiple choice questions. There are no open response. There is no essay. So it is straight up multiple choice questions where students are reading short excerpts or looking at a graph and deriving information from it, looking at a lyrical poem and pulling information from it, or seeing a question and several quotes from a particular novel, poem, journal article, and picking out from there. Gone are the days where you had a very long paragraph or several paragraphs and 4 questions with it. Now it is one excerpt, one question, one excerpt, one question, one question, one set of things. So you're not going to be answering 4 or 5 questions about the same literary excerpt on that piece. So one thing I tell students a lot is to plan to be switching gears a lot. So you're going to move from a Shakespeare related one to the next one being a journal of, the American Antiquarian Society. And then there's going to be one after that that's asked in a more scientific context. And then you're going to come back to one that's simply asking you about punctuation. So just be prepared to switch gears, but the excerpts are much shorter, which aligns with the shorter duration of the test, and looking for kids to be able to pull out those details pretty quickly. What we see here are the reading and writing content domains. So students in reading and writing will be tested on 4 different content domains. Number 1 is craft and structure. And put simply, this is where you're going to find most of the vocabulary questions. This is where certainly they're testing comprehension, analysis, synthesis, and reasoning skills. But truly, it's about high utility words and phrases in context. So sometimes it's going to be a specific word and you're using words in context to be able to determine the meaning or find the best fit for that particular fill in the blank. Other times it's going to be about cross-text connections. So 2 different texts, what's the connection between the 2, and can you find the most relevant response, the most accurate response? But again, put simply, it's vocab and cross-text connections in that section. Then we have information and ideas. This is where it's always, what's the main idea of this text, or something along those lines. This is where they're asking students to showcase, again, their comprehension, analysis, and reasoning skills, but more so that ability to go into that text and locate, integrate information, find what somebody's looking for, find the right answer in there. And this can be in text, but it can also be in informational graphics. Then there's standard English and standard English conventions, and this is all grammar and punctuation. So A lot of students will find themselves on several comma-related questions or what they refer to as end of sentence versus within sentence punctuation. So this could be about, am I using a semicolon? Should I skip the semicolon and use the word and? Is this more of a dash situation? Am I comma splicing? You're going to see a lot of that, a lot about pronouns and possessives in this section as well. And this is where, you know, sometimes a lot of students experience some confusion on it. I do think schools don't teach it as much as they used to. And this is where working with a tutor and working on practice questions can be really helpful, because they are treating it as though you are an English major at the college level with the MLA handbook. And it's that strict. And then there's expression of ideas, where this essentially measures the ability to revise text to make them more effective, and kind of meet these rhetorical goals. But put simply, it's going to be a lot of transition related words like additionally, furthermore, moreover, and things like that. And then also what they refer to as rhetorical synthesis questions, where you're going to look at a set of notes a student took, read the question about what the student's goal is, and find the appropriate response. So you'll see those two types of questions in that section. All right, so on to the math section. This is going to be a total of 70 minutes long with two 35-minute modules. And that equates to about a minute and 30 seconds per question. And in this, but some of them are going to be quicker, some of them are going to be longer. You're going to find 44 questions. And this is where it's not all multiple choice. You're going to get between 28 and 32 multiple choice questions, and then 8 to 12 student produced questions. So that is between the two sections, right? So 8 to 12 student produced ones overall, not 8 to 12 student produced ones per section. So that's what you'll find there. The student produced questions, there's just a little box where students need to fill in their answer. If it's the same decimal as a fraction, they'll take either answer as long as it's exactly the same. And so in this section, you're going to find that they're going to also cover 4 different domains. One of them is algebra. As we know, the College Board's SAT is typically very algebra focused. And it is algebra focused, not typically, it just is. And so it measures the ability to analyze, fluently solve, and create linear equations and inequalities, and then also solve equations and systems of equations. So you're going to see this as linear equations in 1 variable, 2 linear equations and 2 variables. Questions like that will pop up in this section. So again, you're going to see a good number of algebra related questions here. You're also going to see them in both sections. You're going to, as we get to it, you'll see there are fewer geometry questions. For advanced math, this is going to be where they measure skills and knowledge central for progression to more advanced math classes. So what that means is it's like students moving towards pre-calc, towards calculus. But there is no pre-calc on this test. There is no calculus on this test. But it is about understanding absolute value, quadratics, rationals and radicals, and other nonlinear equations. So sometimes a student might be well beyond certain math topics covered here because maybe they're in AP pre-calc or something right now, and they might have to go back and learn some of the algebra or refresh some of the algebra mentioned here. So sometimes we do move away from some of the content depending on how our school's curriculum works or how far we're progressing. So you want to keep that in mind as you're planning for the test. But for a lot of students, it's just about brushing off the math cobwebs, so to speak, and refreshing those topics. There's also problem solving and data analysis. So these are all critical thinking skills related to statistics, really. It's all, you're going to see ratios, rates, proportional relationships, conditional probability, questions about percentages. Usually there's 4 of them, maybe 5 on module 1, same thing module 2, not a huge component of the test, but you can feel safe to say that you're going to encounter at least 8 of them. But usually you're going to see some graphs with that, some percentages types questions. They don't expect a student to have taken a full-blown statistics class. I mean, it certainly doesn't hurt, but some of them are supposed to be, can you apply problem-solving skills? And for that, some students need to work on some of the conditional probability, for example. You might do that with a tutor. You might do that with some independent practice questions, but that's essentially what that section contains. Then, as I mentioned, there is a geometry and trigonometry section where you're going to find 4 and 4. It's usually 4 questions on Module 1, 4 questions on Module 2. Not a heavy geometry test, but you want to make sure that you're retaining that information from when you did take geometry. So they want to see area and volume, angles and triangles, and you're also going to get a trigonometry question or two. Typically speaking, you get 2 of those, one on Module 1, one on Module 2. There's no trigonometry on PSAT 8-9, but on the SAT and on the PSAT MNSQT, you will find trigonometry. So again, oftentimes the students I meet with, they need to refresh a little bit on the geometry topics. As much as it's not a huge component of the test compared to algebra, you still want to go get those points. And you want to, you're going to find some of the formulas available to you on that formula reference sheet, but also some of them, as you can imagine, it's not necessarily going to be the easiest triangle question you've ever encountered, but also about using some tips and tricks to get back to the right answer by looking at, for example, the 4 multiple choice responses. All right. So in this section, we're going to talk a little bit, oops, sorry about that. We're going to talk a little bit about the advantages and disadvantages compared between the digital SAT and the written ACT. But as I mentioned at the beginning of tonight's presentation, there is a caveat to this because the ACT is about to change. We'll go through all of that as we cover this section, but keep in mind, we'll be discussing the current ACT and then talking about the future ACT. So we are at a little bit of a pivot point with this. So right now we've got the format of the digital SAT, which we know that there's a reading and writing test, which is a blend of comprehension, analysis, grammar skills, and some rhetorical skills. And then the math test is a blend of different math skills, which we just went over. The ACT is available in paper and digital formats right now. Digital is at certain specific locations, so it's where available right now, but it is moving to having digital everywhere. And we'll go into the specifics of that, but right now, for example, February 8th is the last typical ACT before some of these changes go into effect, but the paper will remain the same a little bit longer. So again, I'll show you that moving forward. But the test contains an English test, which is a blend of rhetorical and grammar skills, a math test, which is a blend of math skills as well, but more geometry. You will find more geometry in that section. Certainly there's algebra as well and other types of problems, but you will find some more geometry there. There's also a reading test that's a blend of comprehension and analysis. And then there's a science test that has a lot of reasoning and interpreting skills in it. So as of right now, that's where the ACT stands. This is where the digital SAT is going to continue. And so let's talk a little bit about what the advantages are as of now. So right now, the SAT has an advantage in that it's 1 hour shorter. But this is changing. The ACT is about to become shorter. Right now, the digital SAT tests fewer grammar concepts. On the digital SAT, you're going to find about 10 concepts tested, while on the ACT, you're going to find about 15 different concepts tested. That being said, I do anticipate that to stay relatively the same on the ACT. Again, they're not changing their content entirely, so there should still be that differentiation, but we are approaching a change on the test. Right now, students for the digital SAT receive their scores more quickly due to automatic scoring. Usually with the ACT, again, as of right now, they receive it in 2 to 8 weeks. So what some people would perceive as disadvantages to the SAT, that it's taken on a computer, which changes the way students annotate pencil to paper. We know that annotation has been a proven strategy to strengthen comprehension and retention, and actually, writing down and circling the things that you need to annotate. For some students, that may cause some difficulty focusing. Truth be told, though, in all of the conversations I've had for the last year, meeting with multiple parents and students every week, it does not seem to have been a major issue. I do think for some students, getting used to the annotation on this, where you have to highlight it and then make a little note, I think more students are just highlighting it, not really making a note on it. And I do think that's actually, to some extent what they were doing on the paper-based test anyway. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. But if you notice anything about your child where you think that this could be a difficult spot for them. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the wrong test for them, because obviously the ACT is moving to a digital format as well, though they will retain paper testing. It's something to think about in terms of prep. How do you make sure you're not wasting time on annotation? How do you make sure you're being effective in your annotation? How do you make sure you're retaining and comprehending what you have there? And so that can be a specific strategy for your student. And then what we already talked about before, the digital SAT is adaptive. So we know that this makes it really imperative for students to try to move from the first module to get into that higher bracket in module 2 hard. So again, when it's not necessarily a disadvantage, it's a consideration. So we want to make sure that students know that module 1 dictates the difficulty of module 2, and their performance in module 1 of math dictates the difficulty of module 2 in math, and that affects the overall score of the test. So again, this just requires some tweaking in terms of the prep approach. I don't necessarily consider it a full-on disadvantage, but for some students, it might get into their head a little bit, and I can understand that. As you'll see on the next couple of slides, the ACT is not going adaptive. So again, that can be a consideration if you feel as though that might be an issue. For the ACT, we have some disadvantages here, which some of them I do imagine will stay the same. The ACT has what we refer to in the industry as time-wasting questions on the reading section. These are a lot of like, choose everything except, so it's wording phrases a little bit more in a backwards way, whereas the SAT has come more out with saying we're going to ask questions directly. Then they also have think in reverse questions, like choose the grammatically incorrect answer. There's other ones where like you choose none in terms of like, what would you change in this sentence? So for some students feel like that's a trick question, or why would it be none? Or am I assessing that this is perfectly accurate? So we do refer to those as time wasting and think in reverse. Reading test on this is also the third section. And over the years throughout my career and from other professionals that I work with, a lot of students feel that the reading test coming third is mentally, you're already drained by then, and then it drains you further. With them reducing the length of the test, as you can imagine, that may no longer be an issue because they're cutting out quite a few questions here. For advantages, they still have a paper test available, and they plan to for the foreseeable future. They are not eliminating the paper test this spring, and they don't have to. Neither of their tests are adaptive. SAT had to eliminate the paper-based test because they went adaptive. Since they are not going adaptive on their test, they are still offering the paper-based test for students. So while you can get a digital test now at certain locations, this spring you'll be able to get it in more locations, and then you'll see the option to choose every time you register between the two of them. For some students, it can be a better test if you're better at geometry versus algebra. But again, both tests test each type of math there. So it's whether or not you feel as though having a weightier amount of one might affect you, but your prep plan can address that accordingly. The ACT also offers a STEM score based on that science section, and they take into consideration your math as well. So that can be a helpful thing. It's certainly not the end-all be-all of college admissions. They're going to look at AP science scores and things like that more heavily, and just like your honors classes and your general scores in math. But it can be a helpful feature. And you always want to take note of any schools that have some sort of indication that they'd like to see that, but generally speaking, both scores are accepted equally at all schools. So current ACT is 2 hours and 55 minutes long. As I mentioned, it contains an English section, a math section, a reading section, and a science section, as well as an optional writing section. So that takes it to 3 hours and 35 minutes long, but that's right now. It's offered on paper and digitally at select test centers, and it's accepted at all colleges that accept the SAT. So we just talked about this piece. We can also compare scores on a conversion chart. So the ACT is out of 36 points, the SAT is out of 1,600. There is a concordance chart where we can see, okay, an 1150 equals X, and we can go through it that way. The new ACT, so starting in April of 2025, so that's the first test date after the February ACT. Students testing online will experience more flexibility and choice, a shorter test, and more time per question. So only the students testing online in April are going to have that experience, and it will be available for across the board for students to be able to choose that. But those students that are taking the paper-based test won't experience the shorter test until September. So again, these are all considerations in terms of your timeline and your planning moving forward. And we do know that as of right now, the ACT is saying they plan to offer both paper-based and digital tests simultaneously for the foreseeable future. They did also say 2 years ago that they weren't going to do a digital test, though. So keep that in mind as you monitor the changes from them. And we will keep everyone up to date as we continue to hear changes, and we'll send it out in our newsletters. And you can always check in with me too to see what I've recently gleaned from the information that they've released. All right. So in terms of planning ahead, I know we're at the last 10 minutes of tonight's presentation. Just wanted to share a few things that students and parents can think about as you game plan for the digital SAT that we're talking about tonight, or as you're thinking about the ACT. One thing I suggest this to everyone, and my own daughters, and before I even worked at Novastar and when I was back in a high school, take a practice test, take a mock test, and I do strongly suggest taking one with us. The in-depth analysis that our platform has is really incredible, and it shows a lot of insights into what you can do to plan really specifically for your own child, or if you're a student in the audience, for yourself, so that you're not scrambling to try to study the entire SAT. You're going to be able to focus on what you need the most support with. So you can simulate test day and establish a baseline. We want to get that baseline score and separate it out from the PSAT a little bit. We want to see the full-blown test. We want to see where you're taking a few more advanced math questions, but let's use all that data together. Then you're going to want to book a consultation with a test prep expert. And so this is, you would be booking with me, for example. I'm one of the options for that, or two of my colleagues who are available for this as well, to go over the results in depth and what exactly they mean and what the recommendations are. Suggestions for what you should do in a given scenario where you're seeing a lower score on math versus on verbal, or you didn't expect a certain breakdown between the two, but we can get really kind of in the weeds in a good way of seeing exactly what kinds of problems need a certain kind of plan to address them to maximize a student's score potential and to ease some of the anxiety around test taking. Then, of course, I do suggest customized tutoring. The way to get better at this test is to work with an expert to plan accordingly. It is, whether you're planning for the adaptive nature of the scoring, whether you need some refreshing on geometry, if you're not feeling too good about the punctuation section on reading and writing, whatever it might be, working with someone who is so familiar with the test can help you not only with that content I just mentioned, but also strategies that are specific to the digital SAT. Excuse me. And so in that case, like when you're going to start with content in a lot of the cases, move on to strategy, but we tailor it differently for every student. So some students coming to us with a very high starting score might not have as much of a content issue. They might need to be working on strategy. They're taking too long on certain questions. They need to have a different approach to how they even start answering questions on a section. Should they start at the end rather than number one? Different tactics like that. Then there's also a lot of calculator tips to help you get to the answer more quickly. Then we want to, in any scenario, track progress. Taking more mock tests after doing diligent work, both on your own and with a tutor, to make sure you're making that improvement before you ever step foot in official test day. You want to see that you've made that progress on a simulated test. And also, we suggest the mock tests with some semblance of regularity, because you want to build up test day stamina. To take a test that long, sitting in one particular space, with segmented, like one little break in the middle, you want to build stamina for it and be as familiar with it as possible. All right. So, a couple things to think about game plan wise. If you take a mock test with us, for example, or you have an official test score and you don't test into hard module 2 for either reading and writing, or math, you want to take the time to master those concepts that you saw in module 1, certainly. So go through and look at the ones you got wrong. If you take an official test, you can't go through and see exactly what you got wrong. On our mock test, you can. So that's something to kind of go look at, like if you take an official SAT test day versus taking a mock test with us. You want to make sure you go through those and really see, try to do them again. Look at the explanations, and I'll show you a little piece of that as we go into the next few slides. Revisit those that you were unable to get right and see what the issue was. Was it that you were spending too much time on it? Was it a simple calculator error? Did you miss the point of the question? This is what I mentioned before with those easy questions, so to speak. Oftentimes it's just a kid misread it and they absolutely knew the answer. So go back to those. If you do test into hard module 2, you want to avoid those careless mistakes on any easy questions, certainly. Go get those maximization points there. And focus on practicing hard and medium questions to increase your score ceiling. Of course, this will be even more detailed when we have specific results, so you can really see exactly what each student needs to work on. If it's equivalent expressions, or if it's more so about working on, area and volume, whatever it might be, so that you can hyper focus. Again, we say this all the time, don't leave any blank on this SAT and the most recent one prior to this. There's no wrong answer penalty. So if all else fails, guess. If you can get it down to a 50-50 shot, guess. If you can say before the test starts that you're always going to pick C when you have no idea, establish that plan, because there's no wrong answer penalty. And you might as well try to get some points there rather than leaving it blank where you're going to get no points. And then you want to avoid careless mistakes. I know I said this again on those easy questions, but because of the weighting that we see here, those questions matter. Pace yourself. The digital SAT is shorter, but on reading and writing, you have 1 minute and 11 seconds. And then on math, you have 1 minute and 35 seconds per question. But like I said, some of them are going to feel like, oh, in 20 seconds, I got to the answer. So no problem. But you do really want to pace yourself to make sure that on the questions you need to come back to. So we want you to finish all questions and still have 4 or 5 minutes at the end to go back and check your answers, even if it's 3 or 4, but you want to be able to breathe and go check those questions that you bookmarked. Get familiar with the Desmos calculator ahead of time. If you haven't been using it at school, if you've never seen it before, I know there's a link here that you can't click on my screen, but I will send it to you. And don't worry about determining if a question is hard, medium, or easy. As I mentioned, that can really get into a student's head. And while we want to make sure they're answering all those easy questions right and getting those points right away, it can really get into a student's head and really cause a lot of test anxiety if they're trying to determine, is this one of the hard ones? Is this one of the easy ones? Did I test into hard? Did I test into easy? Try to not worry about that. Easier said than done, but just take the test, get a baseline, see how it goes. For current juniors, I do recommend taking a digital SAT mock test to assess your starting point and get that baseline score. And to compare it to the PSAT, or if you took a Blue Book mock test, or if you have taken one with us in the past and you're ready to take a second one, it can be a really good data point. You want to review the results with an advisor, meet with somebody like myself to go over them and exactly what they mean, so that we can point you in the right direction and find those areas for improvement. But the most effective way to get there, instead of spinning your wheels, for example, trying to go over too much when there's areas you're already incredibly competent in and can be focusing on other things, and some of those strategies too. Begin personalized prep to target specific skills and build confidence. I can't emphasize the confidence part of this enough. It is a reasoning test. There are some psychological elements to it where a student can not feel great going into it. I myself don't regard myself as a really strong standardized test taker or anything like that. But confidence is a huge factor for this. And when you have a lot of prep behind you, you feel a lot better walking into test day. You want to plan to be able to test, if you're a junior, twice before summer or through the summer. So here I would suggest March 8th and June 7th for juniors. I skipped the May one there. If you're taking a lot of AP classes, that's when your AP exams are, and that can be very stressful to have that many tests at once. But certainly students do it all the time. It's a very popular test date. As long as it works for your schedule, that's also a fine choice. Either one between March and then gives you an ample time to look at your results from March and adjust accordingly. Adjust your independent practice, but also adjust what you're working on with an SAT prep coach. This way you have 2 tests under your belt before summer gets underway. You can see about super scoring between the 2, so taking your best verbal and your best math. and then see if you need to test again in August before senior year starts. So that would be one way of looking at it. Obviously, October and November are test dates that are available to you, as well as December. But if you're doing any early action deadlines that are due November 1st, November 15th, you do want to make sure you give yourself ample time. Yes, the scores come back quicker, but you do want to have some leg room in front of you to be able, okay, do I need to test again? So, keep that August test date in the back of your mind as well. And then, of course, if you're thinking about the ACT, stay up to date on all the evolving ACT information that's out there and see if it fits into your goals. By no means do you need to prep for both. Some students do, but I really, I would say the vast majority pick one and stick with it. For current sophomores and freshmen, you want to explore that new digital SAT format, become familiar with adaptive scoring. Take a practice test with us, even if you took the PSAT in October. Let's see where you are now. You've got more math under your belt since then. Let's get a sense of where you stand. And, again, it's only going to make you more familiar with the test, and it can help you really figure out what the best timing for you is in terms of testing. There are some sophomores that we recommend to take it much earlier, and it alleviates some stress down the road based on what math class they're taking this year, based on how they score on certain sections. There's other students where they're perfectly in line to approach, the test during junior year. There's some that are sophomores that are going to take it this spring and this summer. Every student is different, so meeting with a test prep advisor can really be helpful in making that determination and looking ahead for, 2 years of when should I be testing, what should I be doing, what trajectory should I be on. We want to focus on building those foundational skills in math and reading throughout the year. So for both our freshmen and sophomores, we want to see that being the case. A lot of times we get the question about how should I study for more vocabulary on the SAT? You should read more. And I know that that sounds really simple, but it's not as easy as just looking up, on Reddit, hey guys, what words did you see on the test last month? We're only a year into the test. Not every vocabulary word's been released, and they're changing it all the time. So I really suggest that students just continue to read and work on context clues. Consider prep in the spring or summer to get ahead for junior year. So for our sophomores there, that can be really critical. We certainly don't discourage freshmen from doing it either. There are certain kids where it makes a lot of sense to get ahead on that. We have some sophomores that will be done testing before junior year starts. We have some right now that are taking the March, the June, and maybe the August. And we'll go from there. And then, of course, in all cases, keep an eye on updates for the SAT and ACT to just see if it helps with your planning. I will also be sending those out to all families as well. We do have digital mock tests, as I mentioned before, and they are digital, they are adaptive. They're reflective of the content that you will find on the digital SAT, and we are constantly updating and making sure that we're in line with everything and equipped with the exact same tools. So it's a really great no harm, no foul way to practice for the test, get incredibly detailed analysis, free consultation with myself or someone else on my team. And you can take them on an official mock test day. We have one coming up on February 8th, or you can take it at your convenience upon signing up with a team member. So, the tests are in mock test mode. I suggest one of the proctored ones. It can be a really great experience, but if it doesn't work for your schedule or the right date isn't apparent to you right now, we can also work it out. The instructions are very straightforward, and your student just needs 2 hours and 15 minutes of, undistracted time in front of them. Just so you can see our platform quickly, I don't want to hold you guys too long. I know it's 7:04, but you can just see students can highlight, cross out, and then they can flag the bookmarking feature I mentioned. This is what some of the questions look like. So this is the one where we're talking about transition words here. They're looking for you to find the most logical transition in one, for example. And this is that bar of questions up at the top. So this is what your students would see. You'll also see a breakdown of, how many easy, medium, and hard questions they got in Module 1, different things about the content domain. So when you meet with us, we're going to be able to share so much with you about what does this all mean? And once you click into this and you dive deeper, what does that mean for your particular student? I do have parents all the time that are kind of blown away with this, and I mean that in all sincerity. And I myself, as a guidance counselor, feel that way all the time. I wish my students had had something like this years ago. Breakdown of the score, so you'll see if you tested into module 2 hard every time. So this information can be really helpful. And then you get a nice solution for the question. So why is B the right answer? Why is A incorrect? Why is C incorrect? Why is D incorrect? How much time you spent on this? This one's a silly example in the sense that this also includes the amount of time the student went back to it. So not the initial first round through. You can see how difficult it is. And then you get a whole slew of practice questions that are exactly like this question of the same level of difficulty, so you can practice exactly what you need. Then practice exercises here. This would be in the bank if you took a practice test with us. Homework, if you work with one of our tutors, they become your tutor on this platform and they're your teacher. And so then they can assign you different homework assignments based on your progress. Then they can also upload their own. Upcoming virtual mock tests, if you're interested in taking one, we do have one on February 8th, as well as on March 1st, ACT on March 15th, and more to be announced there. The official test dates that are coming up, we have March 8th for the SAT, as well as May 3rd, June 7th, and August 23rd. And then for the ACT, February 8th, April 5th, June 14th, and June 12th. I will send you links to all of this and reminders and whatnot, but just wanted to make sure everyone was aware that we do have one coming up. But if you need something sooner, please do let me know. Quick thing about test prep with us, 98% of our students achieve or surpass their target scores. We have some really great stories from our families that we work with and some really great score jumps that we've seen. And we do know that the College Board themselves says that prep is really necessary for this, and just, as little as 6 to 8 hours can be really helpful. We do see, on average, our families seeking anywhere from 25 to 50 hours of prep for really big score maximization. And just always, again, I say take it twice. 55% of high school juniors improve their scores when taking it again as a senior. So that would be that August test or that October test. We recommend taking it twice, regardless of what year you are, because on average, every student goes up the second time they take it. That being said, it is an average. There's you might get a really tough test day. It might be a bad day. You might not have slept well. Things happen. And there is one test a year, sometimes two, that is considered the hardest of the year, and that can happen. That's why you always want to take it twice. Last steps here, I think I mentioned here, determining your testing goals. What does your student want? Are they the type of student that they're seeking that 1,1500 plus? Are they more in the 1,1200 range? What types of schools are they looking at? What kind of mental goal do they already have for this, and what's realistic for them? Take an SAT or ACT mock test with us, speak with a professional, happy to meet with you all, and create your test prep game plan with a one-on-one coach. Last but not least, I'll just tell you guys quickly, upcoming events. I am doing a test optional policies webinar on February 4th. You'll get the link for that if you're interested in learning more about the different kinds of policies. There isn't just one related to this, what they mean at certain schools, and other things going on with test scores. And again, we have those mock tests coming up. We also have an SAT boot camp this weekend if you're interested, and then another one coming up on February 22nd through the 23rd. Those are 2-day events, 1 day of verbal, 1 day of math. All right. So I know this is kind of the end here. My email address is on here, Bernadette@novastarprep.com, but you'll get an email from me as well that has that. I'll send you the link to meet with us. But certainly you all are going to have access to that. Buy 10, get 2 hours free through next Friday. But again, I'll send you guys all the consultation links, everything that you need to move forward, and everything about upcoming events that might be pertinent to you. So if there are any questions, I don't see any in the Q&A right now, and I know I went over our time a little bit. I do apologize, but I'll be sending this recording to everyone. And from there, I'll be here to answer any questions you have and to meet with you as you and your children need our support. All right, everyone. So unless there are any questions, I'll bid you all good night, and I thank you so much for your time. Thank you all, and take care.